Hello, my name's David Ricci. I'm a photographer and a lifelong resident of Berkshire County. And this is actually my second time on Solo Creatives of the Berkshires. So I'm really thrilled and honored to be asked back for a second time. The first time I was on this program was in late 2022. And I talked about the publication of my photo book, Edge, which was published by Fall Line Press in Atlanta, Georgia in November of 2022. And most of the time I spent talking about working with the publisher and all the decisions that we needed to make about the layout of the book, the cover, the colors, the design, the format, the images, the sequence of the images, the text, and all that stuff. Working with the editors and the designers and the publisher once I had worked with the publisher. But I spent a little bit of time talking about what I had done prior to getting together with Fall Line Press. One thing I did was I put together what we refer to as a photo book dummy, which is what this is. And I used a print-on-demand company called Blurb to print just a few copies and send this out to publishers along with a proposal. And the purpose of this is just to give a publisher an idea of the concept of the book, knowing full well that if I find a publisher, they will end up making something different. So this is a very different book than what I had originally proposed, but they had the general idea of what my work was about and what the concept was for the book. So today what I wanted to talk about was my next book that I'm working on, and on that one I'm pretty much at the beginning stage of developing the photo book dummy and getting to the proposal. So the photography work for this second book is pretty much complete, but I'm starting the photo dummy process. So you can sort of think of this as like part one of developing a photo book, whereas my last episode was kind of part two, so a little bit in reverse. But anyway, let me get started and look through some of the images here. So I've always liked this illustration by Megan Herbert, The Life of an Artist, okay? It's kind of like the iceberg principle. The vast majority of it is below the line. What you see when you go to an exhibition or go to a concert or a dance performance is that little bit, which is the final result. For this project that I'm on right now that I call Hunter-Gatherer, my final goal is the book. So we're nowhere near the final book yet, but I thought, many times I've spoken about my work in the past, and it's mostly been the work you see. And I'm going to show several images here, but I really want to talk more today about the process of getting to the photo book. So this is just a little information about my book Edge, which, as I said, was published last year. It's done very well. We've gotten some really great reviews, and we're informed that it was named the Photography Book of the Year by the Forward Review Magazine Awards for Independent Book Publishers. And the book is, of course, available for sale at your local bookstores and online at falllinepress.com and on Amazon. So I just wanted to show a couple of images from that book just to explain how it ties in with the new book that I'm working on. So in Edge, so the new book, Hunter-Gatherer, is, when I started it off, I was thinking of it more almost like a sequel to Edge. But as you'll see in a minute, things kind of took a turn that were somewhat unexpected. So in Edge, I developed this style, if you will, or this methodology of making compositions that were very dense and complex, and making use of a lot of repeated visual motifs and patterns and complex visual structures. So when it came to looking for a new body of work, I thought that this approach that you might call information overload kind of would lend itself to doing a project on American consumerism and materialism. So for the past 5 years, I have been traveling through more than 24 states in the United States and have made photographs at more than 200 antique fairs and shops and antique malls and flea markets. And at this point, I'm winding down the photography work and starting to work on the book dummy. So stylistically, these first few photographs make use, we get to Hunter-Gatherer, these first few photographs in Hunter-Gatherer kind of make use of that same type of approach that I was using in Edge: complex structure, dynamic color, multiple forms, repeating motifs. And again, I was interested in making photographs of collections of, quote, stuff that we all seek out and acquire. Household goods, costume jewelry, watches, clothes, toys, etc. So that's how I started off. And you can see more of these images on my website, davidricci.net, under the gallery that's called Personal Effects. So you can see this work has a strong connection to the work that I was doing in Edge. But after a while, my path took a few unexpected detours. So for one thing, I started to include human and animal figures in the scenes: posters, mannequins, dolls, paintings, statuettes, toys. And at first, they functioned primarily as a graphic element, as part of the overall complex composition. But I started to compose the pictures in a way that the human or animal figures were juxtaposed with other objects, suggesting a kind of quirky narrative or storyline. So here are just a few of those images. This was taken out in Fort Worth, Texas, at a very funky antique shop that I came across. And a number of themes started to emerge, some related to religion. This was done in Dallas, Texas, at an antique store where it had gotten these things from a church, from the Stations of the Cross, some of them damaged and some not. But this was at a massive flea market in Pendergrass, Georgia. And here's my east meets west. So religion became up into play. There's a number of photographs that I have that reference drug use, and these scenes are all as found at the dealer's displays. So this was just an odd juxtaposition of the crucifix, the hypodermic syringes, and the National Casket Company in the background. So I tried to find these scenes that weren't easy to come across, but had some type of commentary. The commercialization of religion, money comes into play in several of the photographs. American pop icons. Marilyn and Elvis are pretty much everywhere at these antique fairs and flea markets. So there's a lot more of these images on my website in the gallery that's titled Enigmatic Narratives. Another concern that emerged from exploring these marketplaces is how men and women were represented in the past, and how my photographs could work as a commentary on what has become known as the male gaze. So I was curious as to look at what these objects and scenes tell us about misogynist views from the past and how they reflect current American views of male or male and female roles or gender roles in general. So this picture here I came across, there's just a cardboard cutout of the woman with the microphone in the background, or the figure of a woman, I should say, and the male figurines in the foreground. And I call this attention. It looks like she's trying to speak to somebody, but all the male figures that are, at war, getting ready for war, are turned away, not paying attention to her. And this one is called Trophies. So the dealer's booth has a very masculine feel to it, with all the stag heads on the walls and the fishing trophy over on the left, and then the, quote, trophy wife included. So I've come across a lot of advertising paraphernalia, posters, beer trays, etc. And again, trying to find juxtapositions that kind of create some type of a narrative. I don't know if you can see this on your screen, but this is just a display of framed illustrations. The one in the middle says "them, the styles," and it shows 4 male figures, dressed to the nines with top hats, and surrounded by women who are scantily clad. So, some of these things are from the 50s or 60s, but I think in many ways some of these views of gender continue on. So another path that I followed, that I went down, so you can see I've taken a number of detours from my original intent of focusing on American consumerism and materialism. But I started taking photographs of individual objects, and in this case, mannequin heads. So over the 5-year span of the project, I've made headshots of several dozen mannequins. And when I shot them, I really had no idea what I was going to do with these pictures, or even if I would end up presenting them in an exhibition or put them in the book. But eventually I did come up with this piece that I've exhibited a couple of times, which is just a grid of 15 different photographs of the mannequin heads, and this is called "You Were Always the One." So rather than finding scenes where juxtapositions of objects inform the photograph, in this case I've imposed the relationships between the objects by arranging them in the grid. So another road that I've traveled down has to do with dolls. I've come across well over 1,000 dolls, and I've photographed more than 200 of them. And this picture includes just 60 of them. And they're photographed on site in the dealer's booths, just as I find them, using available light and an iPhone. And some of the portraits kind of emphasize the unrealistic beauty ideals that dolls often embody: perfect features, smooth skin, dazzling eyes that kind of influence our children's understanding of attractiveness. But some of the others kind of veer in different directions, playing off the doll's frozen expressions. But as is the case with the mannequins, my sitters, if you will, have no interior monologue. They have no thoughts, no feelings or desires, no personal past or memories. But each doll has a history. Okay, having been bought and sold one or more times, passing through the hands of unknown numbers of children and adults, and often collecting blemishes and scars along the way that transforms its original countenance. And since the sitters have no identity, the portraits of the mannequins and dolls offer a point of departure for a narrative that can only be completed by the viewer, who brings their own meaning and memories to the picture. So lastly, and most troubling and challenging and provocative, for a good part of the last 2 years, I've made hundreds of photographs of what is known as black memorabilia, which is blatantly racist subject matter. And for this presentation, I am not showing the most horrific or provocative images, since they need to be handled with care and presented in proper context and with accompanying text. But these photographs are intended to make people aware of the ongoing marketing of these objects and to promote conversation around racism in America that continues today. So this piece is called The Inner Circle, which these first 3 pieces were all taken on a recent road trip throughout the eastern United States from Massachusetts down to Florida. This one is called Inner Circle, which references the antebellum and post-war, plantations in the South, where people make the argument that black people were employed by the households and they weren't really slaves, and they're really part of the inner circle. But in reality, they were never of the same status or stature as the plantation owners. This piece is titled The Bluest Eye, which references Toni Morrison's first novel, which is based on a girl growing up in Ohio who wants to be more accepted, meaning, quote, more white. And one way to accomplish that is by getting blue eyes. The book is about a lot more than that, but this is just a kind of a tip of the hat to Toni Morrison's Bluest Eye. And this, I think I came across in Georgia. So the title of this is Minutemen, Minute Men, referencing the 3/5 rule or law that blacks were counted as 3/5 of a human being. So these two I came across at an antique mall in North Carolina. These are large plastic forms of Mrs. Claus. And although I'm not showing the images that are a little more horrific, a lot of the black memorabilia includes figurines or illustrations or drawings of black people with exaggerated features. This manufacturer seemed to go in the other direction. Okay, we've got a white Mrs. Claus. We need to make a black Mrs. Claus. And rather than worry about the features, let's just use the same mold and make the exact same form and even keep the blue-gray eyes. So it's almost degrading in the other direction, if you will. This is a kind of a complex photograph. There's a lot going on. This was taken at the Brimfield Antique Fair in Brimfield, Massachusetts. And this kind of touches on both the how women are used to promote products, but also contrasting whites and blacks. Okay, the white people in the background, the women there are, happy and successful, and they buy cars and they fly airplanes and they drink Coca-Cola. And down in the middle, where you have all the black mammies kind of lined up like Coke bottles, right? And actually in the same color, red, white, and black, if you will. And then there's some illustrations down at the bottom, which are a little more provocative, I think. So this I came across at an antique fair in upstate New York a couple of years ago. And these are just two posters that were displayed side by side, but I was struck by, on the right, again, the white people are at the beach enjoying themselves. And then the Rastus figure for used on cream of wheat for decades until recently they stopped using it. But Rastus is, seems happy, but he's, serving the white folks. And I was just struck by the phrase on the right-hand side, how could you improve this picture? All right, which picture do you want to improve? Do you want to improve the one on the left or the one on the right? So these are just, actually I think I've showed 40 or 50 pictures, but that's just a small fraction of the number of images that I have that can make it into this book. But the question remains, is it a book or is it a few books? And how do I make sense of all this material? Because there's such a broad array of subject matter and themes. And how do I combine it into a cohesive whole that makes sense? Because putting together a photo book is a very different process than installing an exhibition in a gallery or a museum. Well, to start that process, I have printed out, for now, just a little over 300 small prints, each one about 4 by 5 inches. And this photo here shows just about half of them. And the reason to make the prints is to live with the images for a while and to look at connections between the photographs that I might not have considered previously, and to come up with preliminary groupings and sequences, to find common threads, and hopefully to eventually conceptualize the book. And from there, I use a software tool to play around with the placement of the photographs on my computer screen and to explore the sequences and groupings in a book format digitally, eventually to print it out. And that'll get me to the, quote, book dummy and the proposal, not to the final version of the book. So again, this is in a very early stage and by no means anywhere near a complete book dummy, but I'm going to switch over here to a PDF version of, a preliminary version of what could be the book Hunter-Gatherer. And this is like my third version of what will probably end up being 24 versions before I'm done. So this is, think of this as a very early rough draft. Let me just go back one. For this particular version, I've used a book format that is 8 by 10. So it's 10 inches high and 8 inches across, but when the book is opened, it would be 16 inches across. So if you can visualize 10 by 16. And so there's no text here, right? I got question mark text. So text is can be a very important factor in a photo book. I have no titles for the images in here. I have no captions. There's no essays right now. Those are things that will make the whole book come together. Now, in earlier versions of this that I worked on, I started off with the dolls. Okay, so it's not just a matter of sequencing from one image to the next, but it's a matter of developing ideas. But now I decided, well, maybe I should start with booth shots and then move in closer to get to the photographs of juxtapositions of a few objects, and then maybe to the individual objects. So this is just one way to then playing around with it. In a previous version, I had some of these piles of clothes on one side of the page, and on the other side was one of the mannequins wearing clothes that had colors that tied into it. This version here, I'm doing a set of 4. So yeah, this is my playing field right now. And I can guarantee this will not be the final version of the book, but it's getting me started off. I didn't show any of these earlier, but I have dozens of photographs of animal head trophies. How do I tie in these piles of costume jewelry that I've shot? Maybe this is one way of doing it, with a mannequin wearing jewelry and talking about how we like to accessorize. Playing off on the hats. So again, I showed earlier the grid of 15 mannequin heads, which I've exhibited in a couple of different galleries, but I wonder if it'll work in the book as a 15 image grid, maybe spread across 2 pages or maybe not. So this, somewhat offensive photograph here, I just want to stop here because it's hard to see what's going on in the background of the picture. There's a poster on the wall, and what it says is, what is a girl? And then there's a poem underneath it about what a girl is. And on the left side of that poster, there's a girl combing her doll's hair. And then in the foreground is this, somewhat offensive cardboard cutout of an advertisement for Busch beer. All right, so this is just the way I found it. What is a girl or what is a woman, right? And I think at this point I would need to put some text in here and make it clear that I'm not trying to promote the misogyny. And then I kind of tried to weave in some of the dolls and the mannequins and some of the images I've made that juxtapose different objects that have some suggestion of misogyny or gender roles. So that one on the right, both Sean Connery and Roman Polanski have been involved with sexual misconduct, if you will, to put it lightly. And right above them are, of course, the ads of women promoting Pepsi Cola. In the different ways that males have been presented in the past, and what does it say about the current society? The one on the left was just taken out of a shot from a magazine, tightly cropped. So this is another avenue that I've thought about exploring, which, again, I'm making the juxtaposition here. I'm lining up the somewhat creepy images of these ceramic mugs with pictures of dolls. And so it kind of brings up a reference of child abuse. I don't know if I want to go forward with this or not. But it's something I'm playing around with. So just trying to give you an idea of the types of things that go through my mind. And as this progresses, after I go through more and more versions of this, I will bring in other people, photographer friends of mine, photo editors, and get their input, because it always helps to have other pairs of eyes in making these decisions, even at the developing the dummy stage. And I felt obligated to include Barbie here, as the Barbie movie is being released this week or next week. So eventually I'll get to the proposal stage and get to the book dummy and shop it around to publishers and hopefully find a publisher. That was on the recent trip as well. So the pairing, the grouping, the placement is all very, very rough right now. They're just moving things around on the screen and trying to get ideas, and then moving the hard copy 4x5 prints around in my studio. And how do I bring in the black imagery? Okay, can I blend it in with images of white dolls or white figures or white illustrations? These two images I came across at two different places. But again, creating the narrative by imposing the juxtaposition on my part. So the other question is, how do I bring in? I do have some images, the one on the right, that are somewhat humorous, okay? And the structure of the photograph is very similar to the one on the left, which I think can be taken much more seriously. So it's another question that arises, how do I incorporate these kinds of images to the book, or maybe I don't include them at all? So again, just thousands and thousands of decisions that need to be made to get to the final version. And then trying to end on a more positive note. We're starting and ending with the baby with the eyes closed, but ultimately ending with the peace sign. And again, this is back to work you see and work. And sure, I showed you some work you see, but again, my final work you see is going to be a book. So I thought it'd be interesting to show a lot of the work that goes on behind the scene and the process that's involved. And perhaps I have another appearance on this program, and I'll be further along, and I'll have a book dummy or a book. So that's it. I just want to thank Sherry Steiner again for having me back to this program, and the folks here at Southern Berkshire TV for putting all this together for me. So thank you very much.